What is a lie? One court I read years ago, Second District Court of Appeal years ago in Florida, wrote that a lie, and I've always liked that, is a misrepresentation of fact with the intent to deceive. I would go a step further and say it's a misrepresentation of fact with the intent to deceive in a bad way. If I say, no, that haircut looks great on you, and I'm lying to spare your feelings, then it's a fib. It's something else. I don't know what it is. Well, Tampon Timmy's involved in 3 lies or deceptions or misrepresentations of fact with the intent to deceive that we have to discuss. Now, as you know, Timmy is scheduled to address the DNC tonight, and it's going to be a barn burner, everybody. He is enjoying this wonderful, this, as Byron York calls it, this rapturous reception, this wildly, crazily enthusiastic reception. And in the last 15 days, Harris, when she chose Tampon Timmy to be a running mate, the Dems have celebrated him as, not only just a governor of Minnesota, but America's dad, America's coach, that Wilford Brimley, Warren Buffett admixture, that lovable lug, that great guy, that lug, that him with his simpleton looks, and and this is by the way, they love his food and his clothes and whatever it is. And he was also the one who dared to call J.D. Vance weird and extol this notion of joy. Notice how the Republicans are all into this. Joy, forward, never anything in particular. No specifics, but just these general terms. Joy, happy, happy. It's like they speak in semaphore, like one word. But he's also developed an incredible and well-earned reputation as being a liar. An absolute liar. A liar par excellence. And there's a wonderful piece in the Washington Examiner that Byron York wrote, and I will provide the link to you. It's an excellent adumbration of the 3 big lies, among many, and he's involved with. First is the IVF deception. This is a beautiful. Tampon Tim decided to wow and absolutely bring Democrats to their knees with his attacks on J.D. Vance. He's one, of course, as I said, I gave him the weird thing. And one of the things that Tampon Timmy has suggested is that Vance, J.D. in June, voted against a Democratic it was called a messaging bill called the Right to IVF Act. And the bill was intended to, in essence, generate publicity and focus regarding a subject for the Democrats, which attacked a Alabama Supreme Court case, which basically, and by the way, it was later reversed by legislation. I mean, it was ridiculous, but it said that it declared the frozen embryos to be persons. And the reasons why they wanted to obviously do something about this was that could doctors face, criminal or civil ramifications from destroying a human being? Is it a person? So J.D. noted that he, of course, personally, absolutely, as does President Trump, they support IVF. And no state in the country bans it. So he voted against the bill, but also wanted to sign on in a statement in support of IVF. And there were other bills, too, which were less problematic in terms of the language, whatever. Okay, fine. So, number one, J.D. Vance is not against IVF. Lie. Now, what happened was these folks absolutely love it. They love to take political advantage in drafting a bill, basically, that will never become law, so that you can vote against it to embarrass the other party. And then you jump on that party for voting against it. And in the case of IVF, it's meaningless because Vance, of course, appears it, but they will say that J.D. Vance voted against the Right to IVF Act. So you always got to give something a good name. The Right to No Child Left Behind. Clean Air Act. Clean Air. He voted against Clean Air. He wants to leave kids behind. You know, that kind of stuff. You know, the Patriot Act. He's not a patriot. Okay. So, Tampon Timmy said, I'm not going to let the facts get in the way with this. I'm going to make this an emotional highlight of my very first speech as Veep candidate. And in this highly personal account, he said that he and his wife used IVF to conceive. IVF. He used IVF. And that their decision should be done, should be a part of this personal event. And it's not a J.D. Vance's damn business or anybody else's. This is the quote. And I read you, quote, in Minnesota, we respect our neighbors and their personal choices that they make. Even if we wouldn't make the same choice for ourselves, there is a golden rule: mind your own damn business. That includes IVF. And this gets personal for me and my family. When my wife and I decided to have children, we spent years going through infertility treatments. And I remember praying every night for a call for good news. The pit in my stomach when the phone rang, and the agony when we heard that the treatments hadn't worked. So it wasn't by chance that when we welcomed our daughter into the world, we named her Hope. Great story, isn't it? Too bad it has nothing to do with J.D. Vance. And this IVF story became part of his political appeal. In a podcast last month, he said regarding J.D. Vance, this was Tampon Timmy's quote: "If it were up to him, I wouldn't have a family because if it were up to him, I wouldn't have a family because of IVF and the things that we need to be reproductive rather. My kids were born through that direct, that way. On a number of other innumerable occasions, he always said that, made it very clear, he and his wife conceived through IVF. Well, one problem, he didn't. This week, the New York Times reported that Tampon Timmy and his wife used another method known as intrauterine insemination, IUI. This is basically where you inseminate. You put semen up into the uterus as close to the fallopian tubes as possible. It's just insemination. IVF is an embryo you create it, but the point is, it falls under this broad rubric, this category of fertility treatments, such as IVF. But there's a huge difference. Unlike IVF, IUI doesn't involve creating or discarding embryos. This is according to the New York Times. And so anti-abortion leaders are not trying to restrict the treatment. People have no problem with that. It's insemination. Okay. So, in peroration, Tampon Timmy and his wife used a technique, IUI, that nobody opposes. But Tampon Timmy saw a political benefit. He saw some gold in this in falsely suggesting and alleging and expatiating that J.D. Vance opposes a different treatment, IVF, which he doesn't. Now, then Tampon Timmy lied and embellished and stretched the accusation by giving a seemingly emotional personal account of his own IVF, which was false. And his lying has left J.D. Vance rather confused and mystified. Quote, he says, "It's such a bizarre thing to lie about, right? There's nothing wrong with having a baby through IVF or not having a baby through IVF. Like, why lie about it? I just don't understand it." That's lie number one. Lie number two. The DUI fabrication, deception, distortion, prevarication. In 1995, when Tampon Timmy was 31, he was stopped while driving 96 on a 55-mile-an-hour road in Nebraska. Okay. And he was drunk. Well, he was drinking. Well, he failed the field sobriety test, which, by the way, I think everybody in the history of mankind has failed. I'm just, as a former prosecutor, I don't think anybody has ever said, you know what, you can drive now. Why? Well, he picked up the quarter fine. You can go. But that's another story. So apparently the police took him to a hospital for some type of blood alcohol level, and he hit a .128. It's above the legal limit, but it really wasn't as high. But you don't know if the number was coming down. He might have been a .25 when he was at his prime, and maybe after a period of time they caught him later on as it was going on. That's why you do 2 tests to see if they're going up or down. But anyway, so he pled guilty to a reduced charge of reckless driving. Actually, it's not reduced. It's an amended charge of reckless. He paid a $200 fine, and that's it. Okay. 11 years later, in 2006, Tampon Timmy's running for Congress. And when the Republicans were kind of digging around regarding the arrest, his campaign denied that he was drunk. All right. I'll give him that one. Maybe he wasn't drunk, but not according to the law. This is what CNN said. In 2006, his campaign repeatedly told the press that he had not been drinking that night, claiming that he failed the field sobriety test due to a misunderstanding related to hearing loss from his time in the National Guard. Here we go. We'll get to that one next. The campaign also claimed that he was allowed to drive himself to jail. Okay. None of that was true. CNN! None of that was true. Walz got away with that Tampon Timmy for about 12 years until he ran for governor in 2018. And then the issue resurfaced. And he finally said, okay, he had been drinking that night. And in 2022, the arrest popped up again when a Republican or right-oriented news organization discovered his alcohol level had been .128. So at that point, there was no debating whether Walz was drunk or not, and the campaign defenses in 2006 had been false. Again, why do you do this? I have no idea. Why don't you say, you know what? I was a damn fool, and I paid my fine, and I was wrong, and I was guilty, and I learned a lesson, and don't you do that. And I want to thank that trooper who gave me the ticket. It was a wake-up call, and I realized this, and that's the law, and we're a country of the law, and I was a damn fool. Don't be like me. Remember, George Bush had that little thing. He had a little... See, that's what you do. But not him. He lies. He's a liar. Okay? Then the third one, the best, the National Guard case. This is my favorite. This is the one that's received the most attention, and I think for good reason. Tampon Timmy served in the United States in the Army National Guard for 24 years. Excellent. Let us not be confused about that. Excellent. In 2003, he was deployed to Italy, hotbed of ISIS and Al-Qaeda activity, to support U.S. military operations and troops in Afghanistan. It was known as Operation Enduring Freedom. Sounds like a feminine product, doesn't it? Enduring Freedom. With wings. In 2005, Tampon Timmy retired from the National Guard as he was preparing for a run for Congress. And his unit was preparing for deployment in Iraq. You know, interesting. Okay, fine. The lies, deceptions, the prevarications, the misrepresentations, making a number of suggesting that he has, he suggested that he actually served in Afghanistan and that he carried a weapon in combat, when in fact, he was involved in support work, which is still admirable in Italy. And the other one is that he referred to himself as a retired combat sergeant major, when in fact he retired as a master sergeant. Okay, fine. Is that stolen valor? Maybe technically, but the point is you're lying. How does a guy in the military confuse a command sergeant major with a master sergeant? And you can say, well, it's not stolen valor because he was already in the military. Well, if a lieutenant who's in the military claims he's a brigadier general, that's stolen valor too, even though he's in the military. So these are really sensitive issues, and there seems to be absolutely no doubt that he's a liar. He gives people the impression that he served in Afghanistan when he had not. He flatly said one time that he retired one senior rank when he retired at a lower one. And on the other hand, a careful reading, according to Byron York, does a great job. A careful reading of some of the Walz statements, Walz's Tampon Timmy's statements, shows that he technically did not lie, as he left a misleading impression. In the words of New York Times account that talked to 4 military experts, all 4 said that they do not believe that Tampon Timmy engaged in stolen valor, but that he did misrepresent his record at times. The word is chicken, it's meaningless. The fact that he served 24 years and was deployed in service is wonderful. But as you know, you find out that you lie. Now, by the way, just so that you know, and again, kudos to Byron York, and again, I have a link to his great article. Axios published a few examples of other misleading. I like misleading. I like prevarication and spinning a few yarns, a few whoppers. They promised a report would be released when it was never, ever written, claiming that Minnesota's pandemic school closures were less extreme and less severe and less extensive than they actually were. None of these are true. He's a liar. And it comes down to simply this. Let me just leave it at this. When somebody lies over little things, things that don't really matter, you have to ask yourself about this thing called the character deal. A great friend of mine, the great wrestling announcer Gordon Soley, said one time, and I'll leave you with this, is some people would rather climb up a tree and lie than stand there and tell the truth. That's what we have with Tampon Timmy. He's a liar. He's a prevaricator. Now, as far as Kamala, she's not a liar. She just doesn't say anything. I mean, to her credit, she doesn't lie. She just doesn't say anything. Now, let me ask you a question. What do you think about this? Be honest. And I especially want to see from people who say, you know what? I don't care. I don't care whether he lies. I don't care whether he lies about IVF. I don't care whether he lies about his military record. I don't care whether he lies about his DUIs. I don't care. Because he's a Democrat. And Democrats lie, or at least it's not Trump, or who cares. Fine, whatever it is. I want you, good or bad, pro or con, to comment as you see fit. Capiche?